This video is sponsored by our patrons. Sit tight and enjoy. To kick this video off to an absolutely flying start, I forgot to record the first 20 minutes. So we are starting here, in media res. Fortunately, not too much happened in that time. I added in some turrets which we missed out last time, and placed down the harvester platforms. I decided I'd gathered enough coal, so I took the platform to go and find a new resource patch. I took the platform. Oh, for the love of God. And of course, I don't even realise until I reached this dandy little iron patch. Thankfully, I'd brought the planetary teleporter with me, so my life was only a little bit harder. After that little hiccup, however, we're back on track. Thanks to all of our mining productivity upgrades, these platforms use a massive amount of materials, so our buffers fill quickly. In fact, we produce so many we can't get them in fast enough. So I spent some time upgrading all of our input belts into red belts. Once that's done, I decided we waste far too much crude oil using basic oil processing instead of advanced. So I start spitballing a proper oil processing setup on the surface here. The first thing we need extra for advanced oil processing is some water, which for some stupid reason I decided to take from the surface instead of the literal infinite teleporting water source in the boiler room. I do go back on this mistake later. In the end I decided to put the refineries up here. And finally we start advanced oil processing. As well as obviously getting the advanced oil products, it also gives us more per crude oil. If you do the math and assume you crack all the products down to petroleum, you'll find that while basic oil processing gives you only 45 petroleum, advanced oil processing gives you 97.5. That's more than double, which makes all the difference when your crude oil is limited. Next we need to set up for cracking, which is difficult usually, but even worse when our space is so limited. I build this setup, but realise I have no way to control how much light oil we're cracking. So I have to tear it all down and try again. Painful. I try fitting it in vertically, but logistically it's just not happening. So again, I pull it apart. So we end up with this, which is alright I suppose, but doesn't fit in as well as I'd hoped. Also, there's not enough chemical plants, so if we do need to turn all the oil into petroleum, it won't be fast enough. With this advanced oil processor now set up, I can hook up to my blue science and save a butt ton of oil. And I can say bye bye to these. The oil savings are nice, but what I really did this for is electric engines. Anyone who's played WARPTORIO before knows why. We don't need to mass produce them yet, so a shoddy little hand-fed setup will do. Soon, a new upgrade comes through to completely ruin all of my pipes along the staircases. It adds an extra load of chest pair to every staircase and the 2 harvester platforms, essentially doubling our potential throughput at these spots. However, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least a little bit annoyed about having to redo all the piping. The biggest upgrade this has given us is the ability to take a full red belt from both harvester platforms up to the main floor, very preferable over this weird mixed rainbow belt. I still need to sort this second belt, which is starting to turn this area into a delectable bit of spaghetti. Once finished however, it actually looks a lot better than I expected. Something we really need if we want to stay on these planets for much longer is automated repairs on the surface. So I put this roboport down, which is enough to cover the entire defences on the surface. However, miners are starting to get destroyed, so I decide to leave. I can't fix that with bots, I just need better harvester platform designs. The next planet we end up on is a peaceful one, and unlike usual, we actually have a use for it this time. We got a new harvester platform upgrade, so I'm using this time to redesign it for the larger size. Also, we need to put turrets on the outside, as spitters were able to snipe the miners without getting shot before. And since we can't place miners without R, I'm using assembly machines as placeholders since they're the same size. Putting all the belts in is the hardest part, as we want approximately the same amount of miners unloading on both sides of the belt. It doesn't need to be perfect, but I want it to be damn close, including balancing these belts halfway to maximise throughput. Once that's finished, I set up an easy little hand-fed bot setup on the surface. Again, we really don't need that many, probably about 100 will be enough. And we can just leave some resources in to start it chugging along. We mustn't forget the most important addition to the platform, defences. We have enough room for a lot of turrets here, however, for now, 4 on each corner will probably suffice. Quickly here, I had a new mod called Fill For Me. This essentially makes it so when you place down turrets, it adds in ammo automatically, as you can see here. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of having a tiny bit of red ammo in my inventory, so it didn't quite work as expected. This is how it should work. It makes it much easier to place down defences quickly, which should hopefully help me play a lot more actively in future. All of those extra miners are going to push the limits of my power plant, so I decided to expand it a bit. I can continue to expand this monstrosity all I want for now, but eventually it is going to need a redesign. It just takes up so much space, especially for a mod where space matters so much. Anyway, we find ourselves on a new planet, so it's time to go and get some use out of that new mining platform. I don't show it so much anymore, but a lot of this mod is spent just driving across the surface trying to find resource patches. It sucks for sure, but the further we progress, the more time we can spend on our planet, which means the less we have to do this. Here we find some crude oil, which is an absolute lifesaver, because we didn't have too much left. It's a pain having to set these up so often. In some ways, this mod can exacerbate some of the more tedious parts of vanilla. Here we can yet again see the use of fill for me, saving me some precious seconds. Contrary to how I talk about this mod sometimes, I do actually really enjoy it. To paraphrase one of my favourite YouTubers, Atomic Shrimp, the funnest problems to solve are interesting shaped ones. I interpret interesting shaped to mean one you don't really experience anywhere else. I think WARPTORIO 2 fits this criteria perfectly. It presents situations you've never seen before, and forces you to come up with solutions completely unique to this mod. All of that, without changing any vanilla recipes, and only adding a few new ones. In this way, it's an overhaul mod not because it changes the recipes, but because it completely changes the gameplay loop itself. But enough waxing poetically about the game, we've hit a dead end. This was a low resource density planet, which I'm usually alright with, but this time it just kind of sucked. Right now, our buffers are empty, so we really need to be pulling in a lot of resources. So I'm gonna dip. Ah, bugger. So that's what happens when you don't stand on the platform when it teleports. My curiosity overtakes me. I need to know if this will work like it used to. It does not. I could play on from here, but I'd kinda be missing out on the entire point of the game, so I won't. Saves coming it is. Luckily I saved like literally 20 seconds before the platform teleported. Next we end up on what I like to call a something is missing planet, named creatively thanks to the message that comes up in the chat when you land there. It does what it says on the tin, it doesn't have any of some kind of resource. It does have iron though, so there's that. I still have some assembly machines to replace with miners. I already did some of them on the last planet while I was waiting to teleport. And no, I don't notice until very far down the line that those miners in the middle are just mining straight into the harvester platform teleporter. Hindsight is 2020 and all that. Here we can see some more strange harvester platform shenanigans. That turret is entirely inside that miner. I literally can't reach it to put ammo in. Now that we have the means to stay on planets longer thanks to our defences, I'm starting to research some warp reactor upgrades to increase our auto warp timer. We can also research the next upgrade straight after that. The next upgrade after the one researching now completely removes the auto warp timer, meaning we can stay on planets for as long as our turrets can fend off the biters. Remember like 30 seconds ago when I showed those miners which were partially clipped into the other platform? This is the result of that. Whichever platform gets picked up first picks up all the entities on top of it, even if they were part of another platform already, which can sometimes lead to goofy situations like that. That next reactor research finally finishes. This one actually manifests a physical reactor in the world. However, it's not very good, so I don't really know what the point of it is. It outputs half the amount of power of just a single regular nuclear reactor. Perhaps more upgrades will increase its energy output. I genuinely have no idea. If you can count and have been paying attention, you might have noticed that our newly upgraded harvester platform doesn't actually have that many more miners than the old one. However, it does have one big advantage over the old one, being that it can fit fluid input for the miners. With just a small redesign, we can incorporate the fluids into our setup and start delivering sulfuric acid to the miners. This will be essential for when we start mining uranium. So we should probably go find some. And we do, but it's far too close to a big alien base. We could try place the platform down, but even if it's out of the range of the worms, it's still going to get assaulted constantly by biters. I try anyway, but it's clear it's not going to work. However, they stand no chance against just some turret spam. I'll probably lose a ton of them, but it's worth it for the quirky green rocks. It's not worth almost dying though. Whatever space those turrets manage to clear is probably enough. It appears to be, but I don't seem to be getting activated by any defensive fire. I realise my mistake as soon as I come into my base. I forgot to add new splitters to handle the uranium ore. I want it sent down to the boiler floor, because that's where I'm going to process the uranium. Once down there, I set up a quick hand-fed concrete setup because we'll need it for the centrifuges. I can only afford one for now, they're incredibly expensive for such a low production base. However, I'm planning to get many more in the future. This is because, in absence of any space to make solar, nuclear is the king of power in this mod. The reactors produce tons of power and are incredibly cheap to run once they're built. Especially once I have Corvarex enrichment, which could probably turn 10 minutes of mining uranium into tens of hours of power. Corvarex is a long way away, however, locked behind purple science, so for now all I can do is gather up resources. Most importantly, I need to gather 40 uranium-235 so I can kickstart the Corvarex process once I research it. I also build a big buffer for the uranium ore, because we're going to need a lot of it. Even as pollution passes 50%, our defences are holding up pretty well. I don't even really need to consider the warp platform when I'm deciding whether to warp or not anymore. The big problem is the harvester platforms, as there's much less space for defences. At this point, my decision on whether to warp or not is decided entirely on how they are holding up. My turret creep at the uranium patch has emboldened me to make stupid mistakes elsewhere. This is just a massive waste of resources, there's plenty of copper elsewhere on the planet. And the worst part is that it didn't even work. It's far too close to the other nests in the base, so any defensive fire will likely pull dormant biters which wouldn't have attacked otherwise. Hang on a minute, I've seen this one before. One thing I didn't know that happened is it actually brings the biters with you. They aren't even supposed to be able to get on this floor. So after that fiasco and a lot of dead ends, I make the informed decision that this planet is shit and we're leaving. Here at least we find a slightly more worthwhile battle. This is a nest size where we at least have a chance of killing. Miraculously, despite the turrets being literally right in front of the worms, the only casualties we suffer is my car. If I didn't have a teleporter in my pocket, that would have been a long walk home. In other news, we've finally saved up enough resources for an entire second centrifuge. Truly are living our best life. I've finally decided that this power plant needs to go. It's horrifically space inefficient and wrapped up in the middle here like some sort of weird knot. So I'll measure out and see if I can fit it in one of the arms of the boiler room. And it looks like I can, quite easily. You might wonder what the belts were for if I could just put the machines down in the first place, and the simple answer is, I'm thick. In the end, we actually have so much space, we can do this fancy thing where you offset the steam engines, so you can put them all side by side. You can hear, just from the sound of the steam engines, how stretched our power grid is right now. Just to listen to it come alive. For some reason at this point I'm still hand-reading military science, however I make one small step forward by fully automating grenades, and oh my god, what do you know, we can afford an entire third centrifuge. Woo, that's what I'm talking about, baby. Sometimes I like to come up here and watch the fireworks. It's a nice break from doing nothing downstairs. If I could go back to when I started this mod and give myself one tip, it would be that harvester platforms aren't the be all and end all. I spent far too much time while playing this mod with nothing to do, when what I could be doing is bringing in trickles of resources from the surface. The little turret things in the corner of the factory floor are perfect for this purpose, and I can run the lines in and just fill up chests on the other side. This is perfect for things like coal and stone, which you only need trickles of, so it's not worth wasting a whole harvester platform on them. Grenades are fully automated, and walls are incredibly easy to make by hand. That means that the only ingredient for military science we can't easily obtain is red ammo. so I'm going to do that next. You might ask why I haven't just fully automated military science if I'm going to do all this, and to answer this question I'd like to introduce you to the secondary antagonist of the series. My own goddamn laziness. You heard that right, I'd rather spend literal hours hand-feeding military science than just automate it and use a little bit of brain power. Before I started playing Factorio, I couldn't even comprehend the idea of procrastinating a game, never mind my favourite game. A sudden alert breaks me from my stupor. Oh shit, what's broken now? Fortunately, I have a pretty good idea where it'll be. Those gun turrets I left around the stone mine only had yellow ammo in them, so if I'm honest, I'm impressed they even lasted this long. It's mostly still standing, but I decided it's not worth the risk leaving it here. As I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, if they've done it once, they can definitely do it again. Unfortunately, there's just a limit for how long we leave these out here without any proper defence, and no way Jose was a piping oil out to these just to keep the trickle of stone going for another couple minutes. And coming in is centrifuge number 4. I know it doesn't seem like that big a deal, but when you only have 6 red circuit assemblers and most of it's going to science, 100 red circuits is a lot. New planet, new problems. We have some new developments to catch up on now. For a start, our gun turrets don't do enough damage, so we're researching all of the projectile damage upgrades we can with our current science packs. This includes an extra one added by WARPTORIO. Also, we've researched another new thing, warp abilities. They use a steadily increasing amount of power and in return benefit us in some way. The one I'm currently using, Stabilizer, stops our platform producing pollution for as long as it's active. We only produce enough power to keep it on for 2 or 3 minutes, but that's 2 or 3 minutes without biter attacks. The amount of power it consumes resets every time you warp, which means you can quite happily use it for a bit straight away each time you start on a new planet. There are 2 other abilities, but they're both a bit useless. There's Chart, which says it reveals an area around the main platform, but I can't seem to figure out how to use it. And then there's Accelerate, which speeds up the warp charge timer, but only by a negligible amount. Overall, I think Stabilize is just the best and most obvious choice. Routing this coal belt through our base is actually beginning to present itself as quite a difficult challenge. Our base is just so densely packed on the bridges around here, it's almost impossible to get the coal through. After surveying it for a moment, I decided to dead end, but I have a better idea anyway. First, I do a little loop-de-loop around the staircase. I've done that a lot whilst playing this mod, walk up a staircase I didn't intend to. So here's my master plan, route it through the furnace setup. And honestly, it works pretty good. As it turns out, this setup's actually 2 tiles wider than it needs to be. Later on when I remake my base again, I'll fix that. There's an alarm sounding on the boiler floor. It's been starved of coal for too long. There's only 3 chests of coal left, which might have lasted us quite a while, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Soon I realised that the coal loop-de-loop, while extravagant, was also completely unnecessary. Jokes aside, the real reason is that there's another resource up here that I want to bring through. First, however, I need to wait for this coal chest to drain. Whilst I wait, I can go and get the miners ready on the other side. I am of course getting more stone. Pretty soon, that chest's emptied and we can hook the line up to some buffer chests instead. Now that we have red ammo automated, we have only the very best defending our mining outpost. We don't even have this stuff at our main base. Then again, I suppose that does have flamethrower turrets, 2 tile thick walls, forget about it. Once this damage upgrade finishes, we have 5 more researches we can do to upgrade the size of our base. After that, this factory floor won't get any bigger until we can start producing purple science. It's going to be a hell of a lot more expensive than anything we've produced up to this point, but it'll hopefully give us some powerful upgrades which will help to offset this. And no, your eyes do not deceive you, I am still hand-feeding coal, like a blithering buffoon. And I also completely accidentally caught that upgrade happening. Once I've upgraded all 4 turrets, I'll be able to upgrade the bridges in between them. This will give us a bit more space around where the furnace stacks are, and maybe allow us to squeeze some more stuff in. The end goal is to compress what we have into a much smaller footprint, which will leave us some space to make the other sciences. Like I said before, purple science is the goal, but I'm also looking to hand feed some yellow science so we can unlock logistics research. Requester chests are going to be a game changer for any sort of relatively low throughput items. Don't get me wrong, belts always win on speed, but bots always win on versatility. Anyway, it's starting to get a bit feisty out here on the surface, so I'm heading over to pull in the mining outpost. Evolution's past 50% now, and the convenience of staying here isn't worth the bullets it's going to take to defend against big biters. If you didn't already hold the belief when starting this mod that every setup is a temporary setup, you'll be a firm believer by the end of it. This mod will make you real familiar with packing things up and leaving. I make the grave mistake of starting the warp timer already. Can you guess what I've forgotten? If I remember correctly, I realise about here what I'd done. Seeing the planetary teleporter made me immediately realise I hadn't brought in the bloody oil setup. I grab what I can, but miss some turrets in the rush. It certainly could have been worse, I suppose. I built this little rocket fuel setup at some point, though I can't find the footage. I mostly just want it for my car, however, it's good to stockpile some for the end of the game. But I think we'll probably make a much bigger setup once we get closer to launching the rocket. Before I can even get 50 tiles away from my base, I realise I've again forgotten the harvester platforms. It's a good job I realised when I did, because without the planetary teleporter, that mistake would have cost us a lot of time. Cheeky drive-by placement. Here, I start planning what our base is going to look like once we've upgraded these bridges. I make what I think is a quite reasonable assumption, that the corridors are going to be the same size as the rooms were, just like the last upgrade. That assumption is, well, I guess you'll see. Immediately. For those of you that don't really understand what's wrong with this, the size I was expecting would have fit 2 furnace stacks in a corridor. This one only fits 1. And this is the final upgrade for the bridges. This is as big as they get. But there's no use crying over spilled milk. There's still things I need to do. Namely, there's a specific technology which will hopefully alleviate a lot of the space and logistical issues we're facing. That of course being the logistics network research. However, it's locked behind 500 yellow science, which is what I'm working on now. Some extra plastic for low density structure. Some quick dirty assemblers to make blue chips. And we actually already have a little flying robot frame set up on the surface here. I've got plenty of construction robots up here now, so I can take any spare robot frames down to make yellow science. I set up a circuit to only add new robots to the robo part if we have less than 100. This means I can skim most of the frame production, but if it needs it, it can still take some to make more construction bots. And finally, I make the actual LDS assemblers. We need this the most, as we use 1 for every yellow science, as opposed to 2 processing units and 1 robot frame per 3 yellow science. If you do the math, that means we need to make a whole 500 LDS, 334 processing units, and 167 robot frames. And here's the little setup that's going to make it all. Assuming that we had enough intermediates to keep this running constantly, which I don't think we do, just this little setup would take almost an hour to produce all the yellow science we need. Thankfully, I've done a lot of waiting so far, and I'm mentally prepared to do a lot more. Once we add some robot frames, our first little bottles of yellow science start to produce. It's going to be a long journey before we get any use out of them. For me, it won't be any more than a couple minutes for you. As luck would have it, our next warp lands us on peaceful planet. Normally, just the sight of it might sadden me. However, I have another use for it. Off screen, I've been putting together some personal robot part equipment, which will hopefully make what I'm about to do quite a bit easier. So I cut off the iron line and put those bots to use. Now, instead of spending 2 minutes doing it myself, I get to watch something else do it for 2 minutes. Truly is the pinnacle of advancement. This isn't as impactful now I've realised I can only fit 1 furnace stack here instead of 2. However, in a mod like this, you've really just got to take the space when it's given to you. The reason that this design's better isn't immediately obvious just from looking at it. I mean, yeah, it's 2 tiles thinner, but where have those 2 columns gone? I mean, there's still 3 columns of belts and 2 columns of furnaces. The answer is that we put the input and the output inserters in the same column. I think that's really the beauty of this game, because you can play it for 900 hours and not even realise something like this, but then you go on the internet and see someone who's been playing for like 5 hours who's already figured this out. So now we can just copy that little design down the stack and move on to our other space saving endeavours. My first idea is that I'm like 90% sure I can fit both my red and green science into this little area where I was fitting just my red science. But that first involves tearing apart a lot of the old base, including that yellow science build I just built, but it's fine, we'll put it somewhere else. I laid out 10 assemblers for red science and 12 for green science, which is enough for 60 science per minute, which we probably won't use, but it's there for if we do. But I'm going to put all my cards on the table right here and now. It's going to be an absolute miracle if we get anything above military science at 60 SPM. It'd be nice, and we'll see what happens when we get some more research, but I'm not going to make any promises. It's not that serious. Why do things by bots when you have the power of hand? If only I used that little fancy technique I was talking about earlier to save space here. Because as far as I know, there's nothing you can do with a 2-tile wide corridor, but if it was 4 tiles wide, well that'll fit an assembler. But alas, as usual, recording me is editing me's worst enemy. My next little space saving technique is to move that big eyesore of an oil storage from down there to up here, where I'll hopefully see it slightly less. And also I feel like it just makes sense to have the oil storage with the oil processing. And the next thing to go is the labs, so we can move them a whole 2 tiles down. Groundbreaking stuff, chaps, pat yourselves on the back. And we can say goodbye to blue science, because we're hopefully going to compress this down also into a small footprint. As usual, we'll just start with the assemblers and work our way down the list until we end up back at the stuff that makes it all up. I believe that the word that I was looking for was raw resources, but stuff sounds good. The first ingredient is of course sulfur, which we don't need a lot of, so I'm just going to put one chemical plant right here, right in front of the science production. And we can then proceed with a bit more scheduled demolition. Also in the background I was pumping over oil from this storage tank up to the surface, the one we built up there, so we can get rid of that now. As it turns out, I saved a bit too much space and now I can't quite get this belt of coal past the belt and insert of assemblers, so I need to take it all the way around and up the other side. But we're going to use that coal to make plastic, which is going to make red circuits, which we'll use for the blue science. But the idea is that we're going to make a bit more than we need, so then we can use all of the excess to trickle feed some yellow and purple science. It's going to end up being about twice as much as we need. Which I mean, I don't even know if we can support that with what we currently have incoming, but it's worth a try. I think especially once we have purple science up, I'm going to be doing a lot more resource collecting and a lot less building, so I want to do this right the first time. Anyway, so in our whistle stop tube with blue science we now have sulfur and red circuits, and the only thing left is the engines. Now they're a lot easier than circuits, but there's something we haven't rebuilt yet which we're going to have to do soon, which is steel. So I procrastinate it and go and tear up old setups. But then I go and actually do it, and you're going to get a bit of deja vu here. Now obviously if I had more than say 7 active brain cells at the same time, I would have just copy and pasted my furnace stack. But that's too easy, apparently. But we need to rebuild all of it by hand again. But you don't need to see that, so wow, look at that. Completed furnace stack. Pretend I did that in like 2 seconds and not like 5 minutes. Anyway, so what do you know, I forgot to leave any space for the pipe and gear production, so I've got to put it up here, even past the steel furnaces. But like, it works, it gets to this engine production fine. It almost feels like I planned it, but I didn't. But we can pretend I did. So yeah, with that connected, our blue science is now technically working in a much smaller footprint to what it was in before. So now obviously what you're thinking is the next logical step is going to be automate military science. And now you're thinking, oh, you know, he's going to take a little chicane, going to set up some yellow science, it makes sense. And then he's going to automate military science. And then I go down to the harvester floor and start, you know, expanding my stone buffer. But it makes sense, because you need stone for military science. And now he's handcrafting military science again. You know, like, I wish I could just reach around into the past and just slap myself across the face. But it is fine, because we're almost at the end, and now next time I can do it right. And I inevitably won't, and I will complain about myself in post. But enough of that, I think. Yellow science is coming along nicely, we're getting there towards 500. I knew it wasn't going to be fast, so it's fine. I mean, I'm not struggling to keep the setup fed anyway, so there's that. Now, I actually have productivity modules in my labs, So we don't need exactly 500 yellow science. And I get like 460-ish, I just assume it's probably going to be enough. Don't assume. Just quickly in the middle here, while you ponder over why exactly I said don't assume, you have a quick update on like the whole resource loading situation. I'm bringing coal up from the harvester floor now into the factory floor, which is going to just make things a lot easier when we're automating some certain sciences. Because what I'm really wanting here is just a little trickle of purple science to really get us through some of the good technologies, which will really benefit us. We haven't had like a pointless little overview of the defences on the surface in a while, so here you are. That is a lot of biters, but that's also a lot of bullets. This isn't really a criticism of a mod, it's more of a criticism of the actual game Factorio itself, but when you get to this point with your flamethrowers and your gun turrets, you don't even really need to think about defence. But definitely give this mod some credit, you do have to think about the resources you're providing for these defences, because in vanilla it almost feels infinite, but when you actually have to think about which resources you have, how much you have left, like you do in this mod, it adds a new sort of layer to the whole defence thing. But yeah, so remember what I was saying about don't assume anything? Well, if you look here, our research bar appears to have ground to a screeching halt at 99%, which is, suffice to say, not good, because our yellow science build is no longer there. So I'm going to do the worst thing imaginable, something you should never do, and I would probably say most people have not done, and handcraft yellow science. No, you can put the pitchforks away, it was only a couple, but that gets us the rest of the way to logistics research, so we can now put down the quester chest. So I'll put down a robot part, handcraft some logistic bots, and put down some requester chests. And no, we won't be building a little internal gravy train for the base. These rails are of course for production science. And produce we shall. If you'd even believe how pathetic it is, our red circuit build can't even keep up with this tiny little purple science build. But I think by this point I decided that was a problem for future me, because I'd got my purple science, and I thought that sounded like a nice little end to the episode. And the proof's right here, we have the little purple bottles in the box, but we won't use them until next time. So thank you for watching, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, and see you in the next one, or sooner. Special thank you to our patrons, Ravi, Dick Dastardly Enthusiast, Handlebars, Fen Blue, and Matthias Faison. If you want to know what makes these videos tick, it's these guys.